In the gilded heart of downtown Chicago, there's a restaurant where Michelin stars are less talked about than the patrons. And among those patrons, one name was spoken only in hushed, fearful whispers: Alexander Davenport. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a storm in a bespoke suit, a man who fed on the anxiety of others. Every waiter, every chef, every valet knew the protocol: stay invisible, stay silent, and pray he didn't look your way. For years, this was the law. But one Tuesday evening, he made a fatal mistake. He picked the wrong target. He thought he saw a simple waitress. What he failed to see was the steel in her spine and the story hidden in her eyes. This is the story of that night, the night a titan of industry was brought to his knees by a woman armed with nothing but a serving tray and her own dignity. Aurelia was not merely a restaurant, it was a theater. Perched on the 47th floor of the Omnicorp Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows presented a panorama of Chicago's glittering skyline, a silent audience to the nightly performance of wealth and power within. The cutlery was solid silver, the linens were Egyptian cotton, with a thread count higher than most people's bank accounts, and the staff moved with the choreographed precision of a ballet corps. They were trained to be ghosts present, but unnoticed, anticipating needs before they were voiced their faces, a mask of serene professionalism. This mask was essential for survival, especially on a Davenport night. Alexander Davenport was the majority shareholder of Omnicorp, the very building they were in. His visits were infrequent, unannounced, and cataclysmic. He was a legend, and like all legends, the stories about him were polished with fear. There was the tale of him making a sommelier, a man with 20 years of experience, taste over 30 wines before declaring them all provincial swill, and demanding a bottle of sparkling water, which he then sent back for being insufficiently effervescent. There was the time he'd reduced a young hostess to tears because her greeting was, in his words, a half-second too slow, an unforgivable sign of corporate lethargy. The staff didn't see a successful businessman. They saw a predator who stalked the plush carpets of Aurelia, looking for any sign of weakness to exploit. The general manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose nerves were visibly frayed into a collection of tics and a permanently furrowed brow, would pace his office on nights Davenport was expected, popping antacids like candy. The key, Henderson would repeat in hushed, frantic briefings, is perfection. Not excellence, not quality. Perfection. No smudges on the glassware. No hesitation in your answers. Your posture must be impeccable. He can smell fear. Don't bleed. Tonight the air was thick with that familiar metallic scent of dread. A last-minute reservation had come through under a pseudonym he often used, Mr. Cole. The kitchen staff sharpened their knives with a little more aggression. The hosts practiced their greetings in the mirror, and the waitstaff, the frontline soldiers, checked their uniforms for a single loose thread, a microscopic stain, anything that could draw the tyrant's fire. Among them was Jenna Rowan. Jenna was different. She wasn't a career waitress, nor was she a starry-eyed acting student. At 28, she had an aura of quiet competence that set her apart. Her movements were efficient, but not rushed. Her smile was genuine, but never fawning, and her eyes, a deep, observant hazel, missed nothing. She saw the nervous tremor in the busboy's hand, the forced smile on the hostess's face, the way Henderson kept adjusting his tie as if it were a noose. Just 2 years prior, Jenna had been an investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune, a rising star with a reputation for untangling complex financial crimes. She had a knack for seeing the story behind the numbers, the human cost of a hostile takeover. But life, in its cruel and unpredictable way, had shattered her trajectory. Her father, a brilliant but gentle software engineer, had suffered a debilitating stroke, leaving him non-verbal and in need of round-the-clock care. The insurance ran out, the savings dwindled, and Jenna's salary, once respectable, was a drop in the ocean of medical bills. Aurelia, with its exorbitant tips, was a lifeline. It paid for the best care facility, for the specialists, for the sliver of hope that her father might one day speak her name again. So she'd traded her press pass for an apron, her keyboard for a serving tray. She did the work without complaint, finding a strange monastic peace in its physical demands. But she never lost the keen edge of her journalistic mind. She watched the powerful men and women who dined at Aurelia, dissecting their conversations, their body language, their casual cruelty, and she found them all disappointingly simple. Tonight, her section included Table 12, the prime corner booth with the most breathtaking view of the city. It was, of course, Davenport's preferred table. Another waitress, a young woman named Portia, had been assigned to it, and her face was ashen. "I can't do it, Jenna," Portia whispered in the frenetic heat of the kitchen corridor, her hands shaking. "Last time he told me my perfume was an olfactory assault and made Henderson send me home. I was wearing unscented deodorant. I need this job." Jenna looked at Portia's terrified, youthful face and saw a reflection of 1,000 other people her reporting had tried to give a voice to the powerless, the intimidated, the people steamrolled by men like Davenport. A quiet, cold resolve settled in her stomach. "I'll take the table," Jenna said, her voice even. Portia looked at her, as if she'd just volunteered to walk into a lion's den. "Are you sure he's just a man, Portia?" Jenna replied, though she knew it was a lie. Alexander Davenport wasn't just a man. He was an institution, an oppressive force of nature. But her father, a man who couldn't even lift a spoon, faced a real battle every single day. Waiting on a rude billionaire seemed, in comparison, a manageable skirmish. She took the wine list from Portia's trembling hand, smoothed the front of her crisp black apron, and took a deep, steadying breath. Mr. Henderson rushed over his face, a mask of panic. "Rowan, what are you doing? Portia has been briefed." "Portia is unwell," Jenna said, calmly meeting his gaze. "I'll handle it, Mr. Henderson. I've studied his file. I know his preferences. 2012. Chateau Margaux, if he's eating steak. Sancerre, if he opts for the Dover sole. Still water, no ice, single slice of lime cut precisely 3 millimeters thick. I know the drill." Henderson stared at her, seeing not insubordination, but a strange, unnerving confidence. He had no other choice. He gave a sharp, defeated nod. "On your head be it, Rowan. On your head." Jenna nodded back, her expression unreadable. She walked out of the kitchen and onto the floor, the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses washing over her. She felt like she was walking back onto the beat, preparing to confront a subject who held all the power. The difference was, tonight, the story was hers. And she had no idea how it was going to end. The grand glass doors of Aurelia swung open, and a hush fell over the front of the restaurant, a ripple of silence that spread outwards like the rings from a stone tossed into a still pond. It was him. Alexander Davenport did not walk into a room. He conquered it. He was a man forged from granite and ambition, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than Jenna's car. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his face was a collection of sharp angles and severe lines. But it was his eyes that held the true measure of the man. They were a pale, piercing blue, cold and analytical, scanning the room not with appreciation, but with the detached air of a king surveying an underwhelming fiefdom. He was flanked by 2 younger men in similar though less expensive suits. They hovered nervously, their bodies angled slightly towards him, like satellites caught in a powerful gravitational pull. The hostess, A woman named Chloe, who normally possessed an iron composure, approached him with a smile that was a little too bright, a little too brittle. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. Your table is ready." Davenport's gaze swept over her, a flicker of dismissal in his eyes. He didn't respond. He simply strode past her, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush carpet, and made his way directly to table 12. His associates scurried behind him. Jenna watched from her station, her heart a steady, rhythmic drum against her ribs. She wasn't afraid. Not in the way Portia was. This was a different feeling, a coiled, watchful readiness. She'd felt it before, sitting across from combative CEOs and slippery politicians. It was the feeling of entering the arena. She waited for him to settle, giving him a moment before she approached. She observed. He immediately found fault, gesturing with a sharp, dismissive flick of his wrist at the floral centerpiece. "Get rid of this. The scent of lilies is funereal. It's distracting." One of his associates, a young man with a permanently anxious expression, practically lunged to remove the vase. This was her cue. Jenna moved towards the table, her steps measured and confident. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and calm, pitched just right to cut through the low murmur of the restaurant without being loud. Davenport's cold blue eyes snapped to hers. It was an unnerving experience, like being X-rayed. He was looking for a flaw, a crack in the facade. She met his gaze directly, without fear and without challenge, a simple professional acknowledgement. "I will be your server this evening. My name is Jenna. May I start you with something to drink, or would you prefer a moment to look over the wine list?" she asked, her tone impeccably neutral. He ignored her question, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're new. I haven't seen you before." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "I've been with Aurelia for just over a year, sir," she replied smoothly. He grunted a sound of profound dissatisfaction. He picked up the heavy leather-bound wine list. He didn't open it. He held it by a single corner, letting it hang like a piece of garbage he was about to dispose of. "The list here is adequate at best," he announced to the table, though the statement was aimed at Jenna. "It's curated by someone who understands price points, not terroir. However, I'm in a charitable mood. Tell your sommelier, what is his name? Tell Paul, that I will consider the 2012 Margot, but only if he can personally guarantee it hasn't been improperly stored by his ham-fisted cellar staff." Jenna didn't flinch. "Of course, sir. And for the other gentleman." The two associates looked at Davenport as if for permission to breathe. The first one stammered, I'll have the same." The second one, bolder, said, "Actually a bourbon for me." "A Macallan and 18. "You will have the wine," Davenport cut in his voice, dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He didn't even look at the man. "We're here to discuss the Fujiwara deal, not to indulge your pedestrian palate, Robert." Robert visibly shrank in his seat, his face flushing with a deep, painful red. "Of course, Alexander. The wine is an excellent choice." Jenna's professional mask remained in place, but behind it, her journalistic mind was taking notes. This wasn't about a dining experience. It was a power play. Every interaction was a test of dominance. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "An excellent choice," she confirmed, her tone giving nothing away. "I will have the bottle brought for your approval." She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. In the kitchen, the sommelier Paul was already sweating. "He asked for the Margot. Does he look angry?" "He looks like himself," Jenna said, taking the bottle Paul offered. She inspected the label, the cork. "He's putting on his usual show. Just breathe, Paul. It's only wine." Returning to the table, She presented the bottle with practiced grace. "The 2012 Chateau Margaux, sir." Davenport barely glanced at it. "Open it." She performed the ritual with surgical precision. The foil cut cleanly, the corkscrew entering the exact center, the cork drawn with a soft, satisfying sigh, not an unseemly pop. She poured a small amount into his glass. He lifted it, not to his nose, but just staring into its dark ruby depths. He swirled it once the liquid clinging to the sides of the crystal glass. Then, without tasting it, he said, "It's corked." The two associates froze. Paul, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, looked like he might faint. Jenna held her ground. She had been a waitress here long enough to know the scent of a tainted wine. There was none. "Sir, are you deaf?" He snapped his voice a whip crack in the hushed opulence of the room. "I said it's corked. The wine is ruined. Take it away and bring me another. Do you have another? Or is your cellar so poorly stocked that you only have one of everything like some provincial tavern?" This was the test. The moment where every other server would have stammered, apologized, and scurried away. The moment where they would have bled and he would have tasted it. Jenna looked from the wine to his cold, expectant face. She could feel the weight of every other diner's stare, the silent panic of Mr. Henderson across the room. She took a breath. "Sir," she said, her voice still perfectly level. "With all due respect, I personally checked the bottle before bringing it to the table, as did our sommelier. The cork is clean. There are no signs of TCA contamination." A stunned silence fell over the table. The associates looked at her as if she had just grown a second head. No one contradicted Alexander Davenport. Ever. His eyes, which had been cold, now burned with a glacial fire. "Are you a sommelier now? Are you a winemaker? Or are you just a waitress with an opinion you were not paid to have? I am a server who knows a good bottle of wine from a bad one," she replied, her voice unwavering. "And this is a very, very good bottle of wine." He stared at her for a long, brutal moment. The air crackled. She could see him calculating, processing this unexpected defiance. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Very well," he said, softly, his voice dangerously smooth. "Pour the wine. We will endure it." It was a dismissal, but it was also a warning. She had won the skirmish, but he was making it clear that he controlled the war. She poured the wine for him and his two cowed associates. As she leaned over to pour for the second man, Robert Davenport, subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifted his leg, nudging the base of the small table stand next to him. The stand wobbled. A full glass of ice water that sat upon it tipped, cascading directly onto Jenna's apron and shoes. The shock of the ice-cold water was jarring, but she didn't flinch. "Clumsy," Davenport said, his voice laced with mock sympathy. "You should be more careful." Jenna looked down at the puddle spreading on the expensive rug at the ice cubes skittering under the table. She looked at his perfectly polished shoe, just inches from where the stand had been. It hadn't been an accident. It was a punishment. A deliberate, humiliating act of petty revenge. And in that moment, something inside her, something she had kept carefully sheathed for 2 long years, finally snapped. The icy water soaked through her apron and the thin fabric of her black trousers, clinging to her skin. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Jenna could hear the frantic, tinny beat of her own heart. She could see the smirks being suppressed on the faces of Davenport's associates, the wide-eyed horror on Mr. Henderson's face as he started to scurry over from across the dining room. She saw Alexander Davenport lean back in his chair, a look of serene, vindicated cruelty on his face. He was an emperor, and he had just swatted a fly. He expected her to stammer an apology, to fall to her knees and start frantically dabbing at the carpet with a napkin, flustered and humiliated. That was the script. That was how the game was played. But Jenna Rowan was no longer playing. She stood up straight, ignoring the cold water dripping down her leg. She looked directly at Davenport, her professional mask dissolving to reveal the cool, assessing gaze of the journalist she once was. "That was not an accident," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was so clear, so freighted with conviction, that it seemed to slice through the restaurant's ambient chatter. Several nearby tables fell silent. Davenport's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He raised an eyebrow. "I beg your pardon." "You knocked that glass over." Jenna continued, her voice steady and implacable. "You pushed the stand with your foot. You did it on purpose." Mr. Henderson arrived at the table, his face slick with sweat. "Miss Rowan, what is the meaning of this? I am so terribly sorry, Mr. Davenport. Davenport held up a hand, silencing Henderson without even looking at him. His full, undivided attention was on Jenna. The amusement in his eyes was replaced by a dangerous curiosity. "That's a rather serious accusation. Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm stating a fact," Jenna replied calmly. "You took exception to me defending the quality of your wine, so you decided to punish me with a petty act of humiliation. You seem to believe that your net worth gives you the right to treat people who serve you as something less than human. I'm here to tell you that you are mistaken." A collective gasp was audible from the surrounding tables. Davenport's associates looked like they were witnessing the end of the world. Robert, the one who had been silenced earlier, was staring at Jenna with a mixture of terror and awe. This was not just insubordination, it was a coup. Davenport was silent for a moment, his jaw tight. The mask of civility had fallen away completely, and what lay beneath was pure, distilled rage. But he was a man accustomed to control. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a whisper of venom. "And who are you to tell me anything?" he hissed. "You are a functionary, a pair of hands that brings me my food. You exist in this moment for my convenience. You have no name, no opinion, no facts. Your only purpose is to do as you're told." He then did something that cemented the moment in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. He took his own linen napkin, dipped it into his remaining glass of water, and tossed the wet, crumpled cloth onto the puddle on the floor at her feet. "Now," he commanded, his voice resonating with absolute authority. "Clean up your mess, on your knees." The entire restaurant was now dead silent. Every diner, every waiter, every busboy was frozen watching the tableau. It was a moment of supreme theatrical cruelty. He wasn't just firing her. He was trying to break her, to make an example of her for daring to possess a spine. Jenna looked down at the wet napkin on the floor. She thought of her father in his sterile room, fighting a silent, monumental battle for every single breath, his dignity stripped away by a body that had betrayed him. She thought of the sacrifices she'd made, the career she'd given up, the endless, exhausting nights working to afford him that dignity in his helplessness. And she thought of this man, this titan of industry, whose power was so fragile it could be threatened by a waitress, a man who had to manufacture victories by bullying the powerless. A profound, liberating clarity washed over her. There were things that money could not buy, and things it could not take away. She raised her head and looked Alexander Davenport straight in the eye. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "No," she said. It was a single word spoken without anger or fear. It was a simple statement of fact, a boundary drawn in granite. "What did you say?" Davenport asked, his voice low and incredulous. "I said no," Jenna repeated, her voice gaining strength. I will not kneel for you. I will not clean up a mess you made. I am a waitress at this restaurant, but I am not your servant. My purpose is to provide you with service, not to be a target for your sadism. You may be used to buying people's silence and complicity as Davenport, but my self-respect is not on the menu. It's not for sale. She then untied the strings of her apron, the one stained with his ice water, and folded it neatly. She placed it on the edge of a nearby service station. I quit, she said, her gaze still locked on his. And I would advise you in the future to remember that the people who serve your food are human beings. They have names, they have families, and they have a limit. You just found mine. With that, she turned her back on him. She gave a brief apologetic nod to the horrified Mr. Henderson, who stood rooted to the spot, his mouth agape. She ignored the stunned faces of the other diners and the whispers that erupted in her wake. She walked with her head held high straight through the dining room, past the hostess stand, and out the grand glass doors of Aurelia into the cool night air of the city. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had lost her job, but she had reclaimed her soul. Back at table 12, Alexander Davenport sat in stunned silence, the entire restaurant his unwilling audience. For the first time in decades, he had been publicly and unequivocally defied. He had gone for the kill and had not only missed, but had been disarmed. The look on his face was not anger anymore. It was something else entirely. Something no one had ever seen there before, a flicker of grudging, astonished respect. He slowly picked up his wine glass, the one she said was perfect, and took a long, thoughtful sip. The silence Jenna left in her wake was more profound than any noise. It was a vacuum, charged with the energy of her departure. Every eye in Aurelia was now on Alexander Davenport, waiting for the explosion, the righteous fury of a god whose offering had been spurned. But the explosion never came. Davenport sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the empty space where Jenna had stood. His two associates fidgeted, unsure of the correct protocol, for when a waitress verbally dismantles their boss and walks out. Mr. Henderson, finally regaining control of his limbs, rushed to the table, his hands fluttering nervously. Mr. Davenport, I am speechless, appalled. I will see to it that she is not only fired, but blacklisted from every fine dining establishment in this city. Her behavior was unforgivable. A replacement will be with you momentarily. Your entire meal, of course, will be on the house. Silence! Davenport said, his voice quiet, but carrying the familiar weight of command. Henderson's apology died in his throat. Davenport turned his cold gaze on the manager. Get me her file. Her file, sir, Henderson stammered. Is that a complicated request, the personnel file of the waitress who just quit? Her name, her address, her employment history. Bring it to me, now. Of course, sir, immediately. Henderson practically ran towards his office, a man escaping the gallows. Davenport then looked at his two associates, who were trying their best to look like part of the furniture. The deal is off, he said flatly. Sir, Robert asked, confused. The Fujiwara deal. But we were about to. I have lost my appetite for it, Davenport cut in. You have both demonstrated a singular lack of initiative and backbone tonight. Your sycophantic silence was deafening. I have no interest in closing a multi-billion-dollar deal with men who would allow their leader to be dressed down by a waitress without uttering a single word. Go home. We will revisit your positions at Omnicorp in the morning. The two men paled their faces, a mask of pure terror. They rose silently, their dinner untouched, and slunk out of the restaurant like beaten dogs. Left alone at the table, Alexander Davenport swirled the wine in his glass. He had come here tonight for sport, to exert his power in the small, petty ways that had become a habit. He tested everyone, his employees, his rivals, his servers. He saw the world as a place of predators and prey, and he lived in a constant, self-imposed state of vigilance, prodding for weakness for the soft underbelly. That waitress, she hadn't been weak. She hadn't been emotional or hysterical. She had been calm, analytical, and utterly immovable. She hadn't just stood up to him. She had diagnosed him, dissected his motives with the precision of a surgeon, and dismissed him as if he were the one beneath her. It was infuriating. It was fascinating. Henderson returned holding a single manila folder as if it were radioactive. He placed it gingerly on the table. Davenport opened it. The single page contained the usual information. Name Jenna Rowan. Address in a modest neighborhood on the north side. A list of previous jobs. And then he saw it. The entry that made him freeze. Previous employer Chicago Tribune. Position investigative journalist financial desk. Reason for leaving family medical emergency. A journalist. It all clicked into place. The unnerving eye contact, the calm under pressure, the articulate and devastating takedown. This wasn't a disgruntled waitress. This was a professional. He scanned the page again, his eyes lingering on her name. Rowan. The name scratched at the edges of his memory, a faint echo from a long-forgotten battle. He closed the folder and stood up, tossing a black credit card onto the table. For the wine and for the trouble, he said to Henderson, his voice, once again, a mask of cold indifference. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the entire restaurant staff to exhale in a collective shuddering sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Jenna was on the L train, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels a counterpoint to the chaotic symphony in her head. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins, a volatile cocktail of terror and exhilaration. She had just torpedoed her only source of income, the one thing keeping her father's care afloat. Panic began to set, in cold and sharp. What had she done? She got off at her stop and walked the few blocks to her small apartment, the city lights blurring around her. She felt hollowed out, drained. She had won a moral victory, but moral victories didn't pay the bills. Inside her apartment, she tossed her keys on the counter and sank onto her second-hand sofa. Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the side table. It was of her and her father taken years ago on a hiking trip. He was vibrant, his arm slung around her shoulder, his eyes crinkling with a familiar, gentle laugh. Before the stroke. Before everything. Before his company, a small but innovative software firm he had built from the ground up, had been swallowed whole in a hostile takeover. That was the event that had broken his spirit. The stress, her mother always said, had paved the way for the stroke. Her father's name was Daniel Rowan. His company had been Rowan Innovations. Jenna's mind, the journalist's mind, that had been dormant for 2 years, suddenly sparked to life. Davenport's name, his company Omnicorp. It was a massive conglomerate famous for its aggressive acquisition strategies in the 80s and 90s. A cold dread far worse than the fear of unemployment began to creep up her spine. She scrambled for her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She navigated to the archives of the Chicago Tribune, her old stomping grounds, and started digging. She searched for Rowan Innovations, takeover or acquisition. Article after article appeared dated over a decade ago. They told the story of a small, promising tech firm being targeted by a corporate raider. And then she found the article that made her blood run cold. It was a feature piece from the Wall Street Journal, complete with a photograph of a younger, darker-haired, but unmistakably ruthless Alexander Davenport. The headline read, Omnicorp's Davenport seals victory in brutal Rowan Innovations takeover. It's not personal, it's business, says Raider King. The laptop almost slipped from her grasp. It hadn't been a random act of cruelty in a restaurant. It hadn't been a chance encounter. The man who had just demanded she kneel before him was the same man who had destroyed her father's life's work. The man who had set in motion the chain of events that led to her father's illness and her own desperate circumstances. She had served a bottle of wine worth thousands of dollars to the architect of her family's ruin. Suddenly, Davenport's strange, intense focus on her made a terrifying kind of sense. The way he had looked at her, the way he had tested her. Had he known? Did her name Rowan mean something to him? Was this all some twisted, elaborate game? The floor seemed to drop out from beneath her. This was no longer about a waitress standing up to a bully. This was personal. This was a reckoning, and it was far from over. The next morning, Jenna woke up to the insistent buzzing of her phone. It was an unknown number, a private caller. She ignored it, her mind still reeling from the previous night's revelation. The buzzing stopped, then started again. And again. On the fourth try, convinced it might be the care facility, she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello. Miss Rowan?" The voice was deep, clipped, and instantly recognizable. It sent a jolt of ice water through her veins, more chilling than the spilled glass from the night before. It was Alexander Davenport. "How did you get this number?" she demanded, sitting bolt upright in bed. "I own the company that owns the company that laid the fiber optic cables your voice is currently traveling on. Getting your number was not a significant challenge," he replied, his tone dry and devoid of any emotion. "Be outside your apartment in 1 hour. A car will be waiting. I have no intention of going anywhere with you." "This is not a social invitation," he cut in. "This is about your father, Daniel Rowan. Be outside in 1 hour." He hung up. The mention of her father's name was a punch to the gut. He knew. He absolutely knew who she was. The confrontation at the restaurant wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate provocation. But why her journalistic instincts took over, overriding her fear and anger. A subject this powerful didn't make a move without a reason. He was dangling the one piece of bait he knew she couldn't resist her father. She had to know what he wanted. Exactly 1 hour later, a sleek, black town car, the kind that whispers of quiet, immense wealth, purred to a stop in front of her building. She got in. The driver, a stoic man in a black suit, didn't say a word as he pulled into traffic, heading towards the heart of the city's financial district. They stopped in front of the Omnicorp Tower. The car didn't take her to Aurelia. It took her to the penthouse. The elevator opened directly into a vast office that was more like a modern art gallery. The furniture was sparse and brutally minimalist. One entire wall was a window offering a godlike view of the city, a view even more commanding than the one from the restaurant. Alexander Davenport was standing in front of it, his back to her. "I ran a background check on you the moment you defied me over the wine," he said without turning around. Jenna Rowan, a name I hadn't thought about in over a decade. I remembered your father. A brilliant coder. A terrible businessman. Jenna's hands clenched into fists. "You destroyed him." "No," Davenport said, finally turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. "The market destroyed him. He created a revolutionary piece of code, but refused to adapt, refused to sell, refused to compromise. He was clinging to a sinking ship, and I salvaged the valuable cargo before it went under. The technology from Rowan Innovations became the bedrock of Omnicorp's entire digital security division, a division that currently employs 12,000 people." "And what did my father get?" Jenna shot back, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. a pittance for his shares and a broken spirit. He got exactly what his shares were worth on the day of the sale, Davenport said coldly. Business is not about sentiment, Miss Rowan. It is about value and leverage. He had none. I had both. So why am I here? Jenna asked, cutting through his corporate platitudes. To gloat. To finish the job you started last night. A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but a grudging respect appeared in his eyes. No, I'm here because you did something no one has done in 20 years. You looked me in the eye and said, no. You have your father's integrity, but it appears to be tempered with a pragmatism he sorely lacked. Last night was a test. I wanted to see if the name Rowan still meant anything. It does. He walked over to his massive, polished obsidian desk and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. I am not one of your employees, Mr. Davenport. He allowed a small, humorless smile. No, you are not. That is precisely why you're here. I have a problem, Miss Rowan, a problem of a philanthropic nature. He explained that his late wife, Helena, had been the driving force behind the Davenport Foundation, the charitable arm of his empire. Since her death 5 years ago, the foundation had become, in his own words, a bloated, inefficient behemoth run by sycophants who are more interested in attending galas than in producing results. They are all afraid of me, he said with a hint of disgust. They present me with meaningless charts and tell me what they think I want to hear. There is no innovation, no dissent, no progress. They are all versions of the 2 men who sat at my table last night. He paused, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers. You are not afraid of me. You have a background in investigation. You are trained to find the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. And you have a personal stake in the concept of ruin and recovery. He slid a thick portfolio across the desk towards her. This is the Phoenix Project. It's a proposal for an urban renewal initiative in the blighted industrial sector on the south side. It involves job training, small business incubation, and affordable housing. My board thinks it's a waste of capital. The foundation's directors think it's too complex. It has been sitting on this desk for 6 months, gathering dust. Jenna stared at the portfolio, then back at him, her mind racing. What does this have to do with me? I want you to run it, he said simply. Not as a charity case, as a business. I want you to take this project, analyze it, tear it apart, find its flaws, and then rebuild it into something that works, something efficient, ruthless, and successful. I am giving you a budget of $50 million and a 6-month timeline. You will report directly to me and only to me. Jenna was stunned into silence. This wasn't a job offer. It was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down on his obsidian desk. It was an audacious, almost insane proposal. Why? She finally managed to ask. Why me? This is some kind of twisted penance for what you did to my father. Do not insult my intelligence by appealing to a sentiment I do not possess, he snapped. I feel no guilt over the Rowan Innovations takeover. It was a sound business decision. This is not about penance. This is about talent. I need someone who can't be bought, can't be bullied, and isn't afraid to tell me I'm wrong. You proved your credentials on all 3 counts last night. Your connection to my past is merely an interesting, if volatile, variable. He stood up, the audience clearly over. The position comes with a salary that will more than cover your father's medical expenses, including access to Omnicorp's exclusive network of specialists. You can see it as blood money if it helps you swallow your pride. I don't care. All I care about are results. He walked towards the window, his back to her once again. The portfolio contains all the details. My assistant, Ms. Albright, will be your point of contact. Let her know your decision by the end of the day. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." Jenna stood there for a long moment, the heavy portfolio feeling like a lead weight in her hands. He was offering her a devil's bargain, a chance to secure her father's future, paid for by the very man who had broken his past. He was giving her a position of immense power, but it would mean working for her family's nemesis. It was a battle, but a different kind. Not one of dignity on a restaurant floor, but one of morality and strategy in the highest echelons of power. Could she take the monster's money and use it for good? Or would she become a part of his gilded, soulless world? She looked from Davenport's imposing silhouette to the portfolio in her hands, the Phoenix Project, rising from the ashes. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She knew her answer. She had to take it, not for him, not even for the money, but for the chance to prove that a Rowan could build something even more lasting than what he had destroyed. Jenna's first day at the Davenport Foundation was like stepping onto a different planet. The offices were a sea of muted greys and hushed reverence. People spoke in low tones and walked with a self-conscious urgency, their eyes perpetually darting around as if expecting Alexander Davenport to materialize from the shadows. They treated Jenna with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The story of the waitress who had tamed the beast had already become a whispered legend within the walls of Omnicorp Tower. Her guide in this new world was Ms. Albright Davenport's longtime executive assistant. She was a woman in her late 50s with a severe haircut and an expression that suggested she had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. She was not warm, but she was efficient to the point of being terrifying. "Mr. Davenport does not care about your methods," Albright stated, her voice as crisp as a fresh banknote as she showed Jenna to a large, starkly modern office. "He cares about one thing, the bottom line. In this case, the bottom line is a tangible, measurable, and positive impact on the community metrics outlined in the Phoenix Project Charter. Do not come to him with problems. Come to him with solutions. Do not miss a deadline, and never ever lie to him. He will know." Jenna quickly understood her role. She was an outsider, a bomb thrown into a stagnant system. The existing directors of the foundation treated her with a cloying, false deference that barely masked their resentment. They presented her with padded budgets, vague timelines, and endless excuses, but they had underestimated her. Jenna Rowan, the waitress, might have been out of her element, but Jenna Rowan, the investigative journalist, was home. She spent the first 2 weeks not in her office, but on the streets of the Southside district the project was meant to save. She talked to community leaders, small business owners and families who had lived there for generations. She ignored the glossy projections in the portfolio and dug into the raw, messy reality. She discovered that the original plan designed by a committee that had likely never set foot in the neighborhood was fundamentally flawed. It was a top-down solution imposed on a community it didn't understand. Armed with binders full of real data and first-hand accounts, she returned to the foundation and did exactly what Davenport had hired her to do. She tore the Phoenix Project apart. In a brutal 2-hour meeting, she systematically dismantled the old proposal in front of the horrified directors. She called their budget fantastical, their community engagement plan insulting, and their success metrics vanity statistics designed to look good on a press release. Then she laid out her own vision, a plan built from the ground up, focusing on microloans for existing local businesses, revitalizing the community center as a job training hub, and partnering with a non-profit to build housing that was truly affordable, not just a tax write-off. The directors were apoplectic. They saw her as an upstart, a waitress playing at philanthropy. They threatened to go to Davenport to tell him his new hire was a reckless amateur. "Go ahead," Jenna told them calmly. "My report is already on his desk." The call from Davenport came that night. Albright's office. 10 minutes. When she walked in, he was standing over a conference table, her revised proposal spread out before him, covered in red ink. "This is not the project I gave you," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "The project you gave me was designed to fail," she retorted, standing her ground. "It was a monument to the Foundation's ego. This is a plan designed to succeed." He peppered her with questions for the next hour, his inquiries sharp and merciless. He challenged her financials, questioned her choice of partners, and attacked every potential weakness in her strategy. It wasn't an argument, it was a stress test. Jenna met every question with a fact, every challenge with a well-reasoned defense. She didn't just know the plan, she believed in it. Finally, he fell silent, staring at the proposal. "Your budget is 20% higher than the original, and my projected return on investment, measured in jobs created and sustained, community growth is nearly double," she shot back. "It's a sound business decision." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the cold calculus in his eyes. It was the spark of a fellow builder, the recognition of a shared language, even if they used it for different ends. "Fine," he said, tapping the proposal. "Do it. But not a penny over this new budget. And Albright will be embedded in your team. She will be my eyes and ears." It was not a concession. It was a victory. Over the next few months, Jenna worked relentlessly. She and Ms. Albright surprisingly formed an effective, if unorthodox, partnership. Albright's encyclopedic knowledge of Omnicorp's bureaucracy and her unflappable demeanor were the perfect complement to Jenna's passion and on-the-ground savvy. Jenna learned to navigate the treacherous corporate waters, and in turn, she showed Albright the human stories behind the spreadsheets. One late evening, while working on a complex zoning application, Albright looked up from her computer. "He hasn't been this engaged in a project since his wife died," she said, quietly startling Jenna. Helena was the one who believed in this side of the business. She believed in second chances. It was a small crack in the facade, a glimpse into the history of the man she was beginning to understand. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man hollowed out by grief who had replaced whatever heart he had with the cold, hard logic of the deal. Driven by a need for answers, Jenna used her access to Omnicorp's deep archives to pull the complete, unredacted file on the Rowan Innovations takeover. She spent a weekend poring over memos, financial statements, and decade-old emails. The truth she found was more complex and painful than the simple story of a villain and a victim. Her father, Daniel Rowan, had indeed been a genius, but the documents showed he was also stubborn, idealistic to a fault, and blind to the changing market. He had turned down 3 generous buyout offers, convinced his vision was the only one that mattered, even as his company was bleeding cash and heading towards bankruptcy. Davenport's takeover had been hostile, yes. It had been ruthless. But the memos also showed he had fought to keep the core engineering team, her father's people, intact. He had recognized the value of the technology when no one else did. He hadn't set out to destroy Daniel Rowan. He had simply seen a valuable asset being mismanaged into oblivion, and had taken it as a lion takes a wounded gazelle. The market was the jungle, and her father hadn't been a predator. The realization didn't excuse Davenport's cruelty, but it reframed it. He hadn't murdered her father's company. He had simply been the mortician for a death that was already inevitable. The true tragedy was that her father had never been able to see that blaming the man, rather than the unforgiving nature of the world he had tried to conquer. Jenna closed the file, a profound sense of sadness washing over her. She felt like she was finally seeing the whole story with all its sharp edges and uncomfortable truths. Her anger towards Davenport, the white-hot rage that had fueled her, began to cool, replaced by something more complicated, something that felt dangerously close to understanding. She knew what she had to do next. 6 months later, in a formerly abandoned warehouse on the south side, now bustling as a community hub, the Phoenix Project was officially launched. There were no press conferences or galas, just the vibrant energy of a neighborhood rediscovering its hope. Jenna stood watching a quiet sense of achievement warming her when Alexander Davenport appeared at her side, a stark figure in his bespoke suit. "The initial metrics are exceeding projections," he stated his version of praise. "There are metrics you can't put on a spreadsheet," Jenna replied, gesturing to the crowd. "That's the real return on investment." She turned to face him, her gaze steady. "I read the complete file on the Rowan Innovations takeover, Mr. Davenport. I understand now that business is a brutal ecosystem. What you did to my father's company was what a predator does to survive. But what you did to me at the restaurant, that was different. That was just cruelty." The accusation, delivered so calmly, landed with surgical precision. The armor in his eyes seemed to crack. For a moment, he looked not like a titan of industry, but a man profoundly alone. "My actions that night were inexcusable." He admitted the word, sounding unused. "Strength is the only currency I value, and I mistook your position for weakness. It was a costly error in judgment." He handed her a thick envelope. "This is not from the foundation. It's a private grant establishing the Daniel Rowan Fund for Stroke Recovery. It will provide for your father's care indefinitely and fund new research." Jenna was speechless, accepting the envelope that represented a piece she thought was lost forever. "I am not interested in your gratitude." He continued, his tone shifting back to business. "I am interested in your talent. The foundation needs a leader, not a caretaker. It needs your vision. The position is yours, effective immediately." He was offering her the keys to his philanthropic empire, not as a gift, but as a promotion earned in a trial by fire. A small, genuine smile finally touched Jenna's lips. "It seems your investment in me has yielded a significant return," she said. "As you told me once before?" Davenport replied, a flicker of mutual, hard-won respect in his eyes. "It was a sound business decision." He gave a single sharp nod and turned to leave a solitary figure receding into the crowd. Jenna remained no longer a waitress or a victim, but the architect of a new beginning, forged not from anger, but from an unyielding belief in the value of human dignity. And so the story of the waitress and the billionaire wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. It shows us that true power isn't about the money in your bank account or the fear you can command. It's about the unshakable dignity that lives inside you. Jenna Rowan didn't just win an argument. She rewrote her own future, and in the process changed a man who seemed beyond redemption. It's a powerful reminder that courage can be found in the most unexpected places, and a single voice speaking the truth can be louder than all the wealth in the world. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone stood up against impossible odds? What would you have done in Jenna's situation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and transformation. Thank you for listening.